Alexa has looked at our terms of reference and wants to speak to the terms of reference on the topics of neglect, abuse and exploitation. So Alexa's prepared some notes and together we'll work through the material. And Alexa, if you need a break or a deep breath, just say, and
Thank you.
And we'll take it slowly. So let's start. Alexa, you wanted to tell the Royal Commission about Bridget and who she is, what she likes doing,
Yep.
and then we're going to talk about some of her experiences at school. So over to you.
Thank you. Yes, about Bridget, I would say she has a hilarious sense of humour. Her number one goal most days is to meet people and talk about life. No topics are off limits. During isolation of ongoing lockdowns, she taught herself how to play guitar. She's proud to be autistic and is intuitively a social justice warrior, although sometimes delivery can be a bit like a sledgehammer, similar to myself. She loves school and always has. Even when things have been dark in the schooling arena, she would wake up excited to get to school. She's not far off 14 and still has not been granted her pen licence. The controversy on pen licences at mainstream schools has been a topic for us off and on over the years. The dogmatic approach of the system that you are only due a pen licence when you can satisfactorily use cursive writing. The pen licence crusaders will say, well, you don't get a driver's licence unless you can drive a car, so stop asking for a freebie. In our opinion, this is just another show of othering. On some days, we roll our eyes together and laugh, and on other days, she asks, why can't the system be kinder to those that learn and do differently? The system is telling her that she's different and that it's not good enough. So that is why we are here today.
So you wanted to sort of start on the first topic of neglect, and you wanted to focus on systemic neglect based on some of the experiences that Bridget has had, but also what you've observed generally.
Correct.
So the first topic is the lack of options within public schooling system, needs not being met.
Yep.
What would you like to tell the Royal Commissioners?
So, yeah, I'll take you through, I guess, our journey, which is fairly long. But when we engaged with the education system and started touring schools before prep, most schools in our region had about 60 to 80 prep students in one open plan area. We knew that this would escalate difficulties for our child in a noisy, overcrowded environment. We were always open with leadership when we were looking at schools about what supports we might need at the time. Transitions were tricky, sensory sensitivities, crowded, noisy places, and traditional reciprocal play with kids her own age. If she did become distressed, it could take a long time for her to recover, and she may need adult support. During the recovery phase, she would often need reduced demands and expectations. So we picked a small independent school which offered small classes of about 12 kids, and we were told that they had a more gentle approach to education. Part of the curriculum was a small daily meditation, which at the time we discussed with our daughter and we agreed she might enjoy, and we were focused on the small class sizes. I never thought in a million years this would be our path, an alternative type setting, as some of the alternative philosophies do not appeal to me, but we knew that we needed to try and find a smaller class for her. To be clear, we never wanted to change anything about her way of being. We only wanted to help her find a way of settling into the education system. Looking at the public school options we had, despite being decent schools, it was terrifying. Our daughter was diagnosed as autistic in prep at age 5.5, although her behaviour was not so much internalised, so it was somewhat less difficult to have her assessed and diagnosed. Our paediatrician was very experienced and she suggested the assessment. Support offered at this independent school was almost non-existent after diagnosis. Leadership really refused to engage regarding any disability supports. No formal policies and procedures, as far as I'm aware of, existed at this school. We had our own private therapeutic support staff, but we were not allowed to bring them on site. There was no individual learning plan given. Honestly, I don't think they even knew what it was. No meaningful accommodations for school mandated meditation sessions, which were 5 minutes in the morning and afternoon. Instead, we were advised by leadership that happiness leads to resilience, and that my child must be very unhappy if she's unable to cope with the demands of school, and she should meditate more. Advised by school wellness staff to purchase alternative medicines like massage oils for feet and to avoid eating hot foods to help settle down periods of dysregulation. She had started to form new friendships, and we were hesitant to move her from the school connections. Eventually, our daughter began to wet themselves before meditation, which had never been an issue before. Our psychologist wrote to the school and said that she should have a period of not joining those meditations, which would have been an accommodation, obviously, and that was not allowed. She was allowed to do meditation at home for a period, but it was not to be ongoing. Her distress continued to escalate. I'm asked to meet with the principal, and I said, if she cannot participate to your standard in that meditation, what does that mean? And I asked, what do you normally do in this situation, given that she's autistic and needs support? And they said they had never come across this before. They advised she could not attend the school if she could not complete the meditation to the required standard in class silent, as she liked to hum. Bridget says that she would ask for extra support for various things and was told to stop being dramatic. Knowing that she was clearly distressed, at the end of term we left the school, and due to the quick transition we went just to the local school in our zone.
Right, so just pausing there.
Yep.
You're now going to talk about the first public school that Bridget went to, and you're going to tell the Royal Commissioners that the support offered at the first public school was, from your perspective and experience, pretty poor, and you had no funded support at that time. What would you like to tell the Royal Commissioners?
Yep. So at the first public school, our daughter was quite dysregulated at school and was considered disruptive most days. Some accommodations were allowed, but no real understanding of how to support autistic students. So often as a parent, you're in a crisis, you're trying to manage your child within but then you're also educating, the teachers and the staff, and it's a lot. So some accommodations were made regarding uniform and the schoolyard. There was a retreat drawing area, but given her impulsivity, it was almost impossible for her to self-direct when she was overwhelmed. We had no funding at that point. So moving schools also meant disrupting peer connections, which leaves a student more vulnerable. She was allowed to attend the office for support, but that meant sitting in the hallway alone. The idea that break times are for social learning and should not involve any staff support is outdated, in my opinion. It doesn't consider the complexities some students face, which can build into extreme anxiety and school phobias. Some allowances in class were allowed, such as movement breaks on occasion, but despite having the autism diagnosis and ADHD, there was no formal documentation in an ILP. They were open to trying an ILP, but I don't think they really knew what to put in it. So as I recall, I don't think anything was ever signed off. Absconding from school began, hiding in the yard at bell time when breaks finished. Altercations in the playground increased. As kids learnt, she would react. Punishment-based approaches to her behaviours. She had to write apology letters to other students that had sought her out and set her off, which is a common theme in our community. At one point, she was taken to the grade 5 class when she was in grade 1 to apologise in front of the class. We were told the new teacher had a tough approach and was great with kids like Bridget. So treating autistic meltdowns and general behaviours as deliberately disobedient is what that means, basically. We left a week into the new year, knowing it would only decline with the new class teacher. I mean, you've got to know when to call it, So one teacher said directly to my child, I don't know why you're changing schools. It's not going to help you changing school, suggesting that the behaviour was out of control and no fault of the school. We never said it was any fault of the school. The school tried to support her, but we could see it was simply beyond them.
So So you left that school,
Mhm.
then started a second public school with a specialist autism program.
Yeah.
And there were funded supports that improved over time. You felt welcomed by the leadership, but these programs turned out to be applied behaviour analysis, ABA, and that actually ended up escalating her distressed behaviours over time.
Mm-hmm.
So how old was Bridget at this time?
Oh, about 7. Yeah, so we sort of did a year and a half at the first independent school, 6 months at the second school, and then about grade 2, so she would have been about 7. Yeah.
Right. So you want to talk to the Royal Commissioners about these therapies, and you've got quite a bit that you want to say on that. So
Yep.
I'll invite you to speak and read to your notes on
Thank you.
this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alexa.
Obviously we did a ring around, we found this school, we were told that the program supported autistic students. We didn't want her to not be in education, so we were lucky to get a place, off we went. We knew nothing much about these programs at the outset. In the end, for our child, this type of compliance-based therapy, the demand-reward cycle, did not have any positive impact for Bridget, and in fact became quite damaging and continued to compound school-based anxiety and her response to flee school. On 2 occasions, she was nearly hit by a bus at the front of the school where she'd escaped the school campus and was in flight mode with no ability to grasp risk or danger when in that escalated state. Leadership eventually applied for severe behaviour disorder funding, which was a gruelling process for Bridget, us as a family, and the staff, often taking 4 members to complete paperwork over months, ensuring every little deficit was pinpointed and ranked in the hope we were lucky enough to secure funding. This type of funding is rarely granted. I noted in G's evidence on, I think, Tuesday, they mentioned that these assessments are often dehumanising, and we would agree with that. The first application was rejected, and with continued commitment from staff to reassess and seek to list more deficits and a reapplication, we had some funding approved at that point. In our state, an autistic student cannot access funding support under autism alone. There must also be either an intellectual disability, a severe language delay, or what is deemed to be severe behaviour disorder. The label itself is obviously horrendous. This is an autistic child that just needs tailored supports. But at that point, you're like, call it what you want, we just need support. Thank you for the funding. So throughout school, we had various private therapies to help learn strategies for her to make sense of the world and the demands of life and school, including psychology, occupational therapy, speech pathologist, and our paediatrician. Eventually, medications were trialled with specialist support through our regional mental health service CAMs. Although the build-up of increased demands at school, general trauma of not fitting in anywhere, and then the added new medications resulted in a peak of absconding from home and school, extreme risk-taking behaviours, self-harming and suicidal ideation at age 8. This finally started to fatigue the school as well at this point. She's not learning anything here in her allocated 6 hours a week. That was all she could be on site at that point for over a year, was 6 hours a week, 2 hours for 3 days, and I had to pick her up then. This all accumulated in my child becoming very unwell and ending up in a mental health crisis at age 8. CAMs were concerned about disassociation, and we were admitted for a 4-week inpatient stay with one parent always with her on site. This was at the statewide inpatient unit at the Austin for observation, medication review as well. The paediatric psychiatrist then discussed with us the relevance of pathological demand avoidance, which is recognised in some countries as a specific autism profile. This helped to explain to us why compliance-based therapies, reward charts as a very basic form, would likely be very difficult for our child and may lead to escalated behaviours rather than a supportive measure. Instead, we should try to work collaboratively and offer options around demands. Our first night sleeping at CAMS, I emailed our local specialist school in the dark, sitting in the dark, and asked if there was a vacancy when we were discharged from hospital. That happened fairly quickly, and we were accepted without the funding already in place by the previous leadership. We wouldn't have been accepted. I don't know what we would have done.
Okay, so this is then the next school.
Mm-hmm.
So Alexa, I've just got a reminder to slow down for our interpreters.
Sorry.
So now you've got the next step in Bridget's schooling journey, and she starts to attend a specialist school. So what would you tell the Royal Commission about the specialist school for Bridget?
So from the outset, I would say she would not have access to an education at all without this type of placement. Putting aside debates about segregated schools, if a child is going to miss out on education altogether, then there is a need for specialist schools, in my opinion. Knowing that the staff could help work through behaviours with her rather than sending her home built trust that the school and the staff would not give up on her. This was her school, and they would not ask her to leave. She found this incredible. She really did. This was the first time that she spoke positively about her learning experience. And it seemed to ignite a fire in her that she realised she was actually able to learn at that point. Albeit at that stage, she had missed out on years of learning. When advocates say that segregated learning needs to be abolished, it's my opinion that they don't always consider those students that need the safety of a locked gate. I realise maybe that falls into restrictive practices, but gates are not allowed to be locked in a mainstream setting. And for us, my daughter explains it, that when you're fighting an invisible obsessive compulsive urges, sometimes to run for a variety of reasons, sometimes she needs the knowledge of knowing that they are secure with a locked gate. This is how my daughter describes it.
Thank you, Alexa, for talking us through the different schools that Bridget has been involved in. The next topic you want to talk about is sort of some features of the way in which education works for Bridget and what you've seen for other people as well. So can we move to the topic of reduced schooling hours during formative years? The prep to grade 3 results in ongoing learning disadvantage. So this is picking up on that theme that you've just spoken about having missed out on years of learning. What would you like to tell the Royal Commissioners about that?
Yeah, so I would just say that for all of her formative schooling years, she had restricted access to schooling, which escalated over time, and by grade 2 she was only allowed to do 6 hours per week, and that went on for about a year or maybe longer. And the only schooling program for autistic students in mainstream school at that stage, I think, was ABA. I can be corrected on that, but I think that's right. And which turned out to be quite detrimental for us and really compounded the feelings of distress leading to that mental health crisis. So in my opinion, ABA should be replaced with a more modern collaborative approach. Listening to the autistic community on this, both children and adults that have been through the system, should be central.
And you wanted also to speak about funding for students who are autistic but have an average language score is limited. What does this mean in terms of how they're assessed?
Yeah, so I would just say, again, putting aside, I guess, the overarching debate about whether there should be specialist school as part of the structure, access to these schools is severely restricted anyway. So getting that funding, we were lucky that we had leadership that said we are going to stand by you and help you with this. Most schools, if you asked for severe behaviour disorder funding, would either say, what is that? Or they would laugh at you and say, there is no way you're going to get that funding. The leadership that took it on for us knew the system and changed our lives, really, by and knowing that potentially we were going to have to move if things weren't going to work out at that second public school. So for us, without specialist school setting, our child would not have access to education due to the extreme risk taking in the mainstream setting.
Katie's spoken about your conference for the last few days and that very strong theme of trauma and the importance of a trauma-informed approach. And Alexa, this is a topic you wanted to talk about, is trauma relating to school exclusion, the lack of community and that sense of belonging, and self-harming at school. What would you like to tell the Royal Commissioners about the importance of a trauma-informed approach?
Yes, so I mean, I appreciate, staff are already under-resourced, and the pandemic hasn't helped that. But as far as trauma-informed approach, understanding where the child is coming from and what they've been through, potentially feeding into whatever behaviours they're seeing, I think there needs to be some sort of training or higher understanding of what some of the kids have been through, and even if you don't know anyone's story, basically you don't know what's going on, and self-harming within the education setting is really a masking and a coping mechanism for a lot of people, that a lot of kids that do self-harm. So telling a child to stop or to punish the behaviour with sending them home or the idea of suspension isn't going to have a positive impact. Driving this behaviour underground is more dangerous, in my opinion. Encouraging open dialogue and support for the student is more important. I know it can be confronting for school staff, and there needs to be proper training, potentially a mental health officer, or I'm not sure, but self-harming is a fairly significant issue for our community. And it's distressing, and people look the other way. They don't know what to do as far as school. Addressing it when it's happening at school is very, very difficult for staff. So treating this behaviour as deliberate is a huge area of concern for us. A distressed child is not deliberately trying to upset anyone and is not attention seeking. Understanding meltdowns and shutdowns and self-harming behaviours fall into the realm of having a panic attack, and many students like Bridget end up in mental health crisis, and self-harming can be an extreme form of self-regulation. Providing alternatives for her and ensuring the student knows they are supported and that they are not in trouble is important.
Thank you. So we now want to turn to the topic of abuse, and some of the matters that you're going to talk about now are quite confronting. And you've, through Bridget's experience, had a number of experiences that you look at as a form of abuse. The first one you want to speak about is the use of unreasonable restraint and the use of force in relation to children. What would you like to tell the Royal Commission?
Yes, on one occasion when she was in a meltdown, two program staff, not teaching staff, not educators, but on site, on campus, pushed my child to the ground and pinned her to the floor from behind, two adult staff members, in an equipment room where she had been separated from other students and staff during a meltdown. During that incident, she was pushed face first to the ground and hit her head with some force. Enough for her to say that her face hurt the next day. This was reported to school leadership, so she told me, I told leadership. It was taken seriously and was dealt with swiftly and to our satisfaction. In that instance, open and direct communication in the follow-up was important to the situation. school leadership being accountable and not attempting to cover up anything, and not attempting to blame the child at all is a huge part of maintaining trust within the school setting, listening to the child involved, letting them know that they are believed and this is not acceptable and that it's not their fault at all. They should be safe at school. Staff dealt with it accordingly and school processes were improved to reduce the chances of a repeat issue. But it's something that, you don't forget when you send your kid off to school every day. And other reports within the community of similar things. It unfortunately, it happens.
Next topic you want to talk about is the experience of girls and sexual harassment by their male peers.
Yep.
Would you like to tell the Royal Commission about sexual harassment?
Yep. So gender imbalance at some specialist schools, some autism specific schools have about 80% male enrolments. This is not accounting for any gender diversity within this cohort of students, which it should account for gender diversity, but this sets the tone. 80% males in a high school setting where they're teenagers. The female or gender diverse students are often, are the minority, and there might be one kid in the class and the rest is teenage boys. Sexual harassment with graphic sexualised language and objectification of females by male peers can form toxic ideas of friendship and relationships and have lifelong effects. And this is one of our biggest concerns at the moment, in that, there'd be sexually explicit and sexually violent language used probably most days. I would say. And it's just full on, to be honest. So she loves going to school. It's the only option that we've got, that's for sure. We feel supported, but it is a fact of her day that, and this can lead to episodes also of physical violence, whether if one of the older male students is having a meltdown themselves or challenging behaviours, she could be kicked or hit with a chair, those sorts of things. As much as it's contained, as much as it can be by the school, it can flare up, and again, it's something that's on her mind when she goes to school every day, that she's more vulnerable as a female student. And after years of discussion and asking, I'm pleased to say the education programs around consent and healthy relationships has now begun at the school.
You said this is a really big concern as she's now almost 14 and you're concerned as she becomes a young woman. How does she manage the sexual harassment at school, and does she have the tools to be able to deal with that? Is that right?
That's right, and to be clear, I mean, the language is pretty horrific. It's not. I realise on any level it's obviously bad, but I don't want her to think that is just acceptable. That they didn't mean it. It needs to be mirrored by obviously the staff about not only is it not okay, but why the language is not okay. Not just it's not just swearing, or it has a bigger impact on a young, vulnerable teenage girl, young woman, it's a huge area of concern for us.
Okay, the next was punishment-based responses to autistic behaviours, and you've addressed this as we've spoken through, but there's one particular point you wanted to make here about public shaming.
I would just say, so I often on over the years, if there's meltdowns, shutdowns or stimming when a child is trying to self-regulate, that their natural autistic behaviours whilst learning, that public shaming and punishment for those behaviours needs to change. It's just so outdated. I'd say it probably goes on in most schools, but now's the time to, I think, really start to accept the broader community and how that may present if a child is nervous or worried about a certain thing, or simply or happy, stimming. If it's not hurting anyone, I don't know why it's, stop, sit still, keep your hands to yourself, that sort of thing.
All right, so the third topic is exploitation, and
Yep.
Can I just cover the topics that you've raised in that first paragraph, saying that often students do not have their needs met within the mainstream schooling system and are pushed to consider other schooling options, including Catholic schools, private schools, and other independent schools. Regulation of these schools is somewhat less than the public mainstream schools from your personal experience, and this can open up a vulnerable group of families and students to exploitation on various levels. This can be damaging, but it is often built on the fear of the child being excluded from school entirely. And you wanted to make some recommendations based on your reflections of Bridget's schooling journey so far.
Yep.
Concerns about her into the future.
Yeah.
What would you like to tell the Royal Commissioners about your recommendations?
Yeah. So I just think there needs to be a consideration of more flexible options in delivering education to this cohort of students, and also around the curriculum, and actually just in general. If you look at our community, tells us there's a Future Schools Alliance, which is a couple of schools that I know of, offer generally more flexible, less demands, less expectations, more interest-based programs, whether that be animals or sewing or whatever it is that the children might be into, that helps engage children with their learning if it's special interest based. I realise, maybe that can't be done at every school, but there should be an increase. If the feedback is those schools are working, then I don't understand why, I guess, there's not more of those schools. And, the way that my child learns, I've been into the classroom during Education Week a week or so ago. It's 6 large desks in one classroom, and the teacher's close up. There's no clutter, there's no noise, there's not too many people. I don't know how you can create that environment in the current mainstream setting. So if you're to remove specialist schools where this is the schooling that the child is getting, then I don't know, do you look to they have other classrooms, but then it's still segregated, it's still them and us, those classrooms. So I don't know what the answer is, but it's the other thing also is the schoolyard. In a mainstream setting, my daughter describes the schoolyard as just unbearable to navigate, despite her. Yep.
So jumping in there, just take you down to, you often speak to Bridget about how she feels going to school and beyond. What has she told you?
Yes. Well, she is resolute that she would not feel safe anywhere but a specialist school. That they're her words. But that she hopes there will be more options available to students in the future. Currently, there are limited options to socialise outside of class with peers. Community-based excursions help, but this is not building long-term friendships or support networks. Engaging with yellow ladybugs has helped to fill this need, building ongoing confidence, support and positive friendships, regardless of school changes. Yellow ladybugs has helped always be a supportive environment that welcomes differences and helps to build a positive autistic identity. This is literally the only group or activity that has helped our child to build and maintain peer connections and a sense of value in the community setting throughout the turmoil of school changes. She also just begun going to minus 18 events, which supports LGBTQIA+ young people. And this is her first experience of a supportive, successful socialising in a non-segregated setting where she is immersed in the general minus 18 community and not only her autistic peers. We do have concerns for her well-being once formal school ends. As G has described in their evidence, it was like falling off a cliff. I can see that this could be the case for many young people that are somewhat cocooned in the specialist setting. Our child sees school as everything, most form of social connections and routine. G mentioned how important it is that young people hang out together, the community of young people in all their diversity, sometimes across school settings. Dual enrolments between schools are generally discouraged due to mixed routines and having to split funding. And in my opinion, this limits community exposure for students in the specialist setting where they could build peer connections rather than just having off-site excursions in the curriculum.
Thank you, Alexa. And Bridget's done a drawing that she wanted to contribute as part of this hearing. But before we show the drawing to the commissioners, Katie, can I come back to you? And you've prepared some slides for the Royal Commission which reflect some comments from your members. Do you want to tell the Royal Commissioners about the slides?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Alexa. We asked our community this year to send us current students and past students what message they wanted to send to the community regarding their education. And what the profound messages back was the internal